Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking at Bitcoin.
Ooh, fun.
Yeah, it should be pretty interesting. We're going to be trying to figure out what Bitcoin might be worth
Okay.
in 2025, and we're going to be basing this on,
2025. Well,
yeah, 4 years from now. We're going to be looking at this paper called Bitcoin, Analisi del prezzo e previsioni 2025.
Okay.
And some of the predictions in here are pretty wild. Some analysts are saying that Bitcoin might be worth $250,000 by then.
Wow, that's a lot of money.
Yeah, it's a ton of money. But of course, we have to keep in mind that Bitcoin is really volatile.
Yeah, for sure.
So are you ready to dive into the wild world of Bitcoin and see what the future holds?
Let's do it. I'm excited.
So the paper starts by giving us some background information on the current state of Bitcoin.
Okay.
As you probably know, it's currently trading at around $84,675.
Yeah, that's about right, I think.
And its market cap is about $1.671 trillion.
Wow. So that's the total value of all Bitcoin in circulation right now.
Exactly. It's already bigger than a lot of well-established companies.
Yeah, that's wild.
Now, the source also mentions that Bitcoin hit $108,000 back in January.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
But then it dipped down to around $85,712. And they actually attribute this peak to Donald Trump's election win.
I don't know about that. I mean, it's always tricky to connect those kinds of events to market fluctuations. You know, there are always so many factors at play.
Yeah, that's true. It does seem like kind of a stretch to say that the election was the sole cause of that peak.
Yeah, I mean, market sentiment, investor behavior, and, just general speculation all probably played a role too.
So basically, we should probably take that claim with a grain of salt.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Yeah.
It's important to think critically about these things.
Yeah.
Not just take everything at face value.
For sure. So putting that January blip aside, the paper is pretty optimistic about Bitcoin's future.
Okay.
One of the main reasons they give for this is something they call institutional adoption. Can you explain what that means?
Yeah, so basically institutional adoption just means that big players like hedge funds and investment firms are starting to invest in Bitcoin.
Oh, okay.
It's a big deal because it brings a lot of legitimacy and money into the market.
So it's like a seal of approval from the traditional financial world.
Exactly. And it's not just hedge funds. We're also seeing the rise of Bitcoin ETFs, which are basically investment funds that track Bitcoin's price. You can buy and sell them on stock exchanges.
So it's becoming much easier for everyday investors to get involved.
Right. The barriers to entry are coming down, which could lead to even more growth.
That makes sense. So we've got institutional adoption, which seems like a major factor.
Yeah.
The other thing they mention is expansive monetary policies. What does that even mean?
Okay, so expansive monetary policies basically just refers to central banks around the world increasing the money supply.
Okay.
It's like when the government prints more money.
Yeah.
And this can sometimes lead to inflation.
Right, because each dollar becomes worth less.
Yeah, exactly. And so some investors see Bitcoin as a hedge against inflation.
Interesting. So it's like digital gold.
Yeah, that's a common analogy. A lot of people see Bitcoin as a safe haven asset.
Okay, so we've got these two big factors that could push Bitcoin's value up: institutional adoption and its potential role as a hedge against inflation.
Right.
But let's get down to the numbers. What kind of price predictions are we actually talking about here?
Well, Bitfinex, which is a cryptocurrency exchange,
Okay.
they predict that Bitcoin could reach somewhere between $145,000 and $200,000 by mid-2025.
Wow. So they're pretty bullish.
Yeah, definitely. And their predictions are probably based on the factors we've already talked about.
Like institutional adoption and concerns about inflation.
Exactly.
Now, what about other analysts? Are they just as optimistic?
Some are even more optimistic, actually. Tom Lee, who's a well-known Wall Street strategist,
Okay.
he's predicting that Bitcoin could hit $250,000 by 2025.
$250,000. Wow, that's
Yeah.
a huge number. But I guess we have to remember that Bitcoin is notoriously volatile.
Oh, absolutely. It's important to remember that these are just predictions. The crypto market is incredibly unpredictable.
Yeah, for sure. So we need to be cautious and remember that there are always risks involved.
Right. It's not all sunshine and rainbows.
Okay, so I think we've covered a lot of ground already. What stands out to you as the most important takeaway so far?
I think the most interesting thing is how Bitcoin is becoming more mainstream.
Yeah, I agree.
More and more institutional investors are getting involved, and it's becoming easier for regular people to invest too.
Right. It feels like we're witnessing a major shift in the financial world.
Yeah, I think so. But as we said before, we need to be careful, not get too carried away.
Right. So let's talk about those risks. What are some of the potential roadblocks that Bitcoin could face?
Well, one of the biggest uncertainties is regulation. Governments around the world are still trying to figure out how to handle Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies.
Right.
New regulations could have a huge impact on the market, and not necessarily in a good way.
Yeah, we've seen that happen before, like when China cracked down on crypto.
Exactly. So it's not just about the technology itself. It's also about the political and economic landscape.
That's true. And we also have to consider the possibility of unforeseen events.
Yeah, like that dip in January.
Right. Even though it's probably not directly related to the election, it does show how unexpected events can affect the market.
Yeah, you never know what's going to happen. A global economic downturn, a major security breach, or even just the emergence of a new cryptocurrency could all have a big impact on Bitcoin.
It's a good reminder that the crypto world is still relatively young and there are a lot of unknowns.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so we've established that Bitcoin's future is uncertain. There are both exciting possibilities and potential pitfalls. But let's bring it back to our listeners. If someone is thinking about investing in Bitcoin, what are some key things they should keep in mind?
Well, first of all, it's really important to remember that Bitcoin is a long game.
Right.
Yes, there's the potential for big gains, but it's a risky asset.
Yeah.
Don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Diversification is key.
Exactly. Another important thing is to focus on the fundamentals. Understand the technology, the use cases for Bitcoin, and the factors driving its adoption.
Do your research and don't just get caught up in the hype.
Exactly. Knowledge is power, especially in the world of cryptocurrency.
And of course, we can't forget about risk management.
Oh yeah, that's crucial. Only invest what you can afford to lose and always be prepared for the possibility of big price swings.
Sound advice. So before we wrap up this part of our Bitcoin deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with this question. We've talked about some of the things that could drive Bitcoin's growth in 2025, and we've looked at some pretty impressive price predictions.
Yeah.
But we also need to remember that those are just predictions. The future of Bitcoin is uncertain.
Absolutely.
But that's also part of what makes it so exciting, don't you think?
Oh, definitely. It's a space full of possibilities, both good and bad.
We'll be back in a moment to continue our exploration of the world of Bitcoin in 2025.
So welcome back to our deep dive into the future of Bitcoin. Before we took a little pause, we were discussing some of the factors that could drive Bitcoin's price up in 2025.
Right, like institutional adoption and those expansive monetary policies.
Yeah, you got basically just central banks increasing the money supply.
Right. And of course, Bitcoin's notorious volatility.
Oh yeah, for sure. It's a wild ride, but those predictions we talked about, like $145,000, maybe even $250,000.
Those are big numbers.
Huge. But we got to remember things change quickly in the crypto world.
It's true. It really does feel like trying to predict which new gadget is going to be the next big thing.
Exactly. And speaking of things that are hard to predict, remember that dip in Bitcoin's price back in January that the paper mentioned?
Oh yeah, the one they tried to link to Donald Trump's election.
Right. And we agreed that connecting it to one single event is probably a bit too simplistic.
For sure. But it does make you think about how things happening outside of crypto can still affect its price.
Absolutely. Bitcoin is part of a bigger system. It's not in a bubble. News headlines, regulations, economic stuff, even what's trending on social media can all play a role.
Wow, it's kind of like that butterfly effect thing.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, kind of. The point is, you got to stay informed.
Yeah.
Keep an eye on what's happening both inside and outside the crypto world.
That makes sense. So for our listeners who might be thinking about investing in Bitcoin, what are some key takeaways they should keep in mind?
Well, I think the most important thing is to remember that this is a long game. I mean, yeah, you might see big gains in a short amount of time, but Bitcoin is super volatile. You got to be patient and think long term.
So no get-rich-quick schemes.
Nope. And don't put all your money in Bitcoin either. Spread your risk. Diversify.
Good advice. What else?
Don't get caught up in the hype. Really take some time to understand the technology, learn about the different ways Bitcoin can be used, and look at the things that are driving its adoption.
Basically, do your homework.
Exactly. Knowledge is power in the crypto world. And remember risk management. Only invest what you can afford to lose and be ready for those price swings.
Yeah, that's key. So we've talked about the potential for Bitcoin to really take off in 2025. We've looked at the factors driving that growth and even some specific price predictions. But now I want to get into the so what.
Interesting.
Let's say those experts are right and Bitcoin hits those crazy prices. What does that mean for the world? How would it change things?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
It's easy to get caught up in the numbers, but the real impact goes way beyond that. You've got to think about the bigger picture.
Right. It's not just about people making money. It's about how it could change the way we think about money.
Exactly. Like imagine a world where Bitcoin or even other cryptocurrencies are the main way we pay for things.
Wow. That's a big change.
Yeah. How would that affect our everyday lives, businesses, governments?
We're already seeing people using Bitcoin for things like buying coffee or even real estate.
Right. And if the price keeps going up, more and more people might start using it, which could lead to a more decentralized financial system. One that doesn't rely so much on traditional banks.
That sounds pretty revolutionary.
It could be. On one hand, it could give people more control over their finances. Less reliance on those middlemen.
So more financial freedom?
Yeah, potentially. And it could also help people who don't have access to traditional banking systems.
But it sounds like there could be some downsides too, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. Like with any big change, there are always challenges. For example, security would be a major concern. With so much money at stake, Bitcoin would be a big target for hackers.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
And what about regulation?
Right. Governments would need to figure out how to handle this new system.
Mm-hmm.
And it could be difficult to prevent things like money laundering or other illegal activities.
So it's not all positive. It's not just about saying Bitcoin is good or bad. It's about really understanding the potential impact, both good and bad.
Exactly. It's about being aware of the complexities and making smart choices.
Well said. So as we continue to explore this, what factor, I want to ask our listeners to think about this. If those experts are right, and Bitcoin hits those sky-high prices in 2025, what will that mean for the world? What kind of opportunities and challenges will it create? What will it mean for you personally?
Okay, so we're back, and we're still trying to wrap our head around this idea of a world with a $250,000 Bitcoin.
Yeah, it's a pretty wild thought, isn't it? A lot of people get caught up in those big price predictions.
Right.
But it's the impact, the so what that really matters.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So let's try to get a bit more specific here. How could a Bitcoin surge actually change things for the average person?
Well, one thing to think about is how it could change the way we send money across borders.
Oh, yeah.
Imagine being able to send money overseas quickly and easily without having to pay those crazy fees.
That would be huge for people who need to send money to family in other countries.
Exactly, or for businesses that operate internationally.
Right. It could really speed things up and lower costs.
Yeah, and it could also make things more efficient and transparent. Okay, so there are definitely some potential benefits. But we have to be realistic here. What are some of the downsides? What could go wrong?
Well, one of the biggest concerns is volatility.
Right.
Even if Bitcoin hits $250,000, there's no guarantee it's going to stay there.
Yeah, it could easily crash back down.
Exactly. And that kind of instability could be really disruptive for businesses and individuals.
Especially if people aren't prepared for those kinds of swings.
Right. And then there's the issue of security.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. With so much money at stake, wouldn't Bitcoin be a huge target for hackers?
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
We've already seen some pretty big hacks in the crypto world.
Right. And as Bitcoin becomes more mainstream, I imagine those attacks would only get more sophisticated.
Yeah, that's definitely a risk. It's going to be really important to develop strong security measures to protect people's money.
So it seems like there's a lot to consider, both the good and the bad. It's not as simple as just hoping for a higher Bitcoin price.
No, definitely not. It's about understanding the complexities and having open and honest conversations about the potential risks and rewards.
I think that's a great point. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with a final thought. We've explored the possible future of Bitcoin. We've talked about what could drive its price up and what could happen if those predictions come true.
Yep.
But the truth is, no one knows for sure what the future holds.
That's the exciting part.
It is. The future is still being written, and you, our listeners, are a part of that story.
Your decisions matter. Stay curious, stay informed, and keep exploring the fascinating world of cryptocurrency.
And on that note, we're signing off. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive.